Thank you for joining us for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. Well, summer is full on, but that doesn't stop the Boom and Bust monthly panel from getting together and talking about the issues. We're pleased to welcome back Joe Oliver, who's a former Finance and Natural Resources Minister in the Stephen Harper government. Gary Marr joins us from Calgary. He's a former Alberta Cabinet Minister and now heads up the Canada West Foundation. And last but not the least, Sandra Pupatello is a former Ontario Trade and Economic Development Minister and joins us from Windsor, Ontario. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Well, I've got to start with the obvious. There might be a federal election in the offing. We don't know when, but all indications seem to be go. So I'd love to get a sense from all of you about what you see as the current state of the economy in Canada on the cusp of that election call. Joe Oliver, why don't we start with you?
Okay, we're bouncing back. Employment isn't quite what we'd like it to be, but we're starting to open up, not fully, and we're also seeing supply constraints, an explosion of demand, and an increase in inflation, which I think is up to about 3.4% last count. The United States is at 5.4%, which is sort of relevant for us in terms of purchasing power. And recall that the last federal budget was based on a couple of assumptions. One is that interest rates would not increase beyond the current level, and of course they're tied to inflation. And the other is we won't have any external shocks. Well, inflation is above the range, and the issue that all the economists are debating right now is whether it's transitory or not. The chairs of the two banks, central banks, are of the view it is transitory, and so the Bank of Canada and the Fed both are quite confident that it will subside, and so they don't have to tighten up monetary policy and increase rates and brutally reverse the bond buying that they've been involved in, which really would be quite a shock to the system. So if they've got it right, inflation will subside and they will be able to keep interest rates low, which will enable the economy to keep going. But that's quite risky indeed, and we have this debt overhang. We also have, of course, the difficulty of sort of guessing whether we're going to have a fourth wave. I mean, it's already sort of been declared by Dr. Tam, but is it really going to be so severe that we're going to have to tighten things up again with reverberations for economic growth? So
yeah, let's.
It's a tough one now to know.
Thank you for that, and Gary Marr, I'd love to get your sense of things. You're in Alberta; things seem to be quite open in the province of Alberta right now. What's your sense of the economy?
Well, I'd be hard pressed to challenge the conclusions of the former Honourable Federal Minister of Finance. So I choose to associate myself with his remarks, but I would add to it that commodity prices are going up. Maybe we're at the beginning of a super cycle. The price of oil and the differential between the price of Western Canada Select and West Texas Intermediate is closing. That's going to be a good thing for provinces like Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia that rely on resource revenues. The price of natural gas is up. The price of crude oil is up. It won't be enough to close the gap on the deficits that these provinces are running, but it will go a long ways to helping close the gap. Other things are going to happen in terms of recovery of the economy in order to bring provinces back to balanced budgets. And maybe the last thing that I'll say is that in the energy sector, I mean, there's still probably 30% of the office towers in downtown Calgary are vacant. It may be an even higher rate than that because there's space that's leased but not occupied. And so while the economy may bounce back in energy, it doesn't necessarily translate into jobs in the energy sector. And so that's going to be something that lags.
We're going to hear from Sandra Pupatello next, but we're going to make sure that she gets full time, so we're going to do it right after the break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Sandra Pupatello, it's now your turn to give us your take on the state of the economy, possibly pre-election mode.
Well, I do think we're in that state of flux right now. Sort of one foot is ready to hit the gas and the other one is still tentatively hanging over the brake. And largely because we're waiting to see what happens. Will there be a fourth wave? We're sort of feeling out this notion of getting back outside and getting back into restaurants. Some provinces more ahead perhaps than others. But I do think we're feeling all these effects of higher prices. We see it in how much we pay for meat these days, the gas, $1.35 per liter. That's a lot more than we're used to paying here. And I do worry that these supply chain issues are critical for us in even having a smooth outcome to get rolling again. Anyone who wants a new build is waiting 12 to 18 months to order a steel joist for their structures. And that's going to put us behind. I do worry that our competition is in the same boat. And that means, as we've seen during the pandemic, there could be other markets that are going to trump our own to help us get back underway. So I do think it's going to be bumpy. And I just hope that the government is in a position to continue the support like we've seen, both for small business, wage subsidies to help getting people back underway to be working again.
No, interesting point. And of course, I guess I would predicate this discussion by saying, our Canadian growth is somewhat uneven, but there is strong growth in certain sectors. There's no question about that. And as Joe mentioned and others, it's all predicated on COVID-19 receding, I suppose is the way to put it. Can I just ask quickly of the panel, how confident do you feel that that's the scenario? Sandra, we'll continue with you. Are you confident that COVID is receding? It's not going to be as much of a factor in the near and medium term?
Well, I actually do. I feel confident about Canada. The trick is, though, that Canada is a trading nation. So the whole world needs to be doing better. We on our own can't be the only ones doing better because we're constantly traveling. Our goods are constantly going back and forth. Our people need to interact with the world. And that means the whole world needs to do as well as we are when it comes to 2 vaccines. Right now, Canada is leading the world in those numbers. Thank goodness. When the fourth wave comes, I have no doubt that it will. It's that its impact on us is going to be minuscule compared to what it would have been a year ago. And that's good news for us. But to be honest, we've got to worry about what's happening in the southern border,
right,
that those borders are going to open properly. For a border community like mine in Windsor, the good news is that our local merchants are doing better than they would have with Canadian shoppers because the Canadians can't get to Detroit. So there's some silver lining for some. But it is, as it's been in the pandemic, it depends on the business as to whether they're doing really, really well, like florists who you can't find a rental van in my city because the florists are using them all the time because everybody's ordering flowers, versus the restaurants who have a massive capacity, but they're limited because they've got to continue with this massive distancing that is required still in a lot of places. So, when you see that hit and miss, the story is just not smooth.
Gary Marr, I'd love to get your sense of this. Obviously, Calgary just hosted the Calgary Stampede. There doesn't seem to have been a super spreader event as a result of that. Are you fairly confident that we're out of the woods?
I wouldn't say that we're out of the woods, but I would say that we're in a position of transitioning from being in a pandemic to being in an endemic situation. So I think there still needs to be people expressing caution about where they're at in a public place and what they do. I think that's true across the country. I would point out that every province and to some degree, even every country in the world has taken a position where they've either been at the very best or also at the very worst in terms of the data, in terms of COVID outbreaks and hospitalization rates and so on. So I think it's something that we need to continue to monitor, but it is something that's a transition. Transitioning to an endemic situation, I think, can help businesses open up as long as we are cautious about making sure that we do it properly. Because make no bones about it, there is a cost to keeping the economy closed up.
Indeed. Joe Oliver, we got about 30 seconds before the next break. You're in mask mandate Ontario. Are you cautious or optimistic?
Well, I'm generally optimistic because of the vaccination rates, and we have, as a number of people have pointed out, an epidemic of the unvaccinated, and our numbers are getting better. That we're going to hit a resistance level. It's happily it's a lot less than the United States, but still it looks like it's around 20% or so. We've got to get the kids vaccinated as soon as the medical permission is granted. And the next thing we're going to start.
Hold that thought because we're going to take a break. Joe, we had to cut you off for a commercial break. Please continue with your thought about your assessment of things.
Well, I was going to say that the next issue I think that people are going to start debating is the timing of the booster shot. Mm-hmm. Israel is now vaccinating or giving a booster shot to anyone over 60 years old. And they're doing that based on data, obviously. Because they were earlier in the game to get everyone vaccinated, they've got the data for what's the resistance level of among the vaccinated population is in respect to the Delta variant, and I guess they're somewhat concerned because while the hospitalizations are very low and deaths are almost non-existent in that group, there are some people getting it and a small number are passing it on. So if you want to, you can't eradicate it, but you want to have total control over it, a booster shot is apparently warranted. Now, why aren't we talking? Why is no one talking about that? I think, hopefully we now have enough vaccines to do it when it's needed. And I'd like to, I think it's time to have that kind of debate and start giving it to the most vulnerable by age and by, health vulnerabilities. So I think we should talk about that. But more generally, I think we're in pretty good shape, and we're able to keep up now, I would hope, with whatever additional vaccinations are warranted for the population. And we'll move in, as Gary said, to an endemic sort of situation where it won't be gone, but it'll be sort of comparable, one hopes, to getting an annual flu shot, which I've been getting for many, many years, and it's no big deal. But it's advisable, and in this case, of course, really necessary.
Right. And I think those are all solid points. And what I'd like to do is just shift the discussion just a bit, because Joe was going more into the medium term, and that's all well and good. But we might have a federal election start in the next week or two. So I want you to sort of do a thought process here and think about how you think the economic issues are going to be framed by the political parties in this election period. Gary Marr, I'd love for you to start this.
Well, I think that what the Liberals will do is they'll try and frame this by saying, we provided a great deal of income support. We allowed the economy to continue to operate. We want to continue to do that, and spend our way out of this problem to some degree. There's been a lot of spending. I think that the parliamentary budget officer has indicated that not all of it has gone into the places where it ought to. But if I were to sort of say, I'm not opposed to the spending as long as the area. So you've got, for example, a lot of money set up in the infrastructure bank that has not been spent yet. And yet, if you look at the importance of having trade infrastructure funded, that would be really good. And I think that the focus ought to be on shovel-worthy projects as opposed to shovel-ready projects. And, I wouldn't propose that, that a spending $600,000 on a skate park in Gabriola Island qualifies as a shovel-worthy event.
Right.
But there are projects that you could put forward that are ready to go that would help our ports, our airports, our roads, our bridges, that would help get what it is that we make and produce here in this country to marketplaces. Because in terms of our rankings internationally, Canada's rankings of infrastructure have steadily gone down in terms of their reliability, according to the surveys that are done of our major trading partners.
We've got about 30 seconds before the next break. I'm going to stick with you, Gary, very quickly. If you were the leader of the opposition, how would you frame that, the economic issues in that sense?
Well, I guess if I were the leader of the opposition, I'd be framing it in terms of these things that we're doing to support people's income, to support the healthcare system, daycare, for example. All of those things cost money, and they can be worthy, but you need to find a way to pay for it. And this is the part that I think has been lacking on the part of the government, is to figure out how you pay for all of this. And so if I were the leader of the opposition, I'd be focused on a plan as to how you create the economic opportunities to create the revenue that is necessary to support spending.
We're going to take another break, but we'll be back with the remainder of the discussion. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, and we're here with our monthly panel. Joe Oliver, former Finance and Natural Resources Minister, former Cabinet Minister, and now head of the Canada West Foundation, Gary Marr, and of course, Sandra Pupatello, a former Ontario and Trade and Economic Development Minister. Sandra, we're going to go to you now. You're going to put yourself in this little thought process that I'm doing here. Let's say that the federal election has been called and the parties are trying to get their messages out on how the economic progress of the country has to be. First of all, what's the government going to say? How are they going to frame it?
Well, I think they are going to say, look, we were there for you when you needed us. And in fact, they were, whether that's individuals who needed support and got it within days of being laid off because of the pandemic, the companies that needed support to get their workers back, sometimes just to pay the rent, support on rent payments. So they're going to stand on their record, but they're also looking to the future. And I'm pleased to see that there's a focus on climate change, mitigation, in terms of shore erosion, flood protection, all of those big programs that are critical to places like my hometown, right here in Windsor, frankly, across the country, but also climate change as it relates to the economy. And how can we get the economy to flourish in light of climate change? How do we do that? And I think we're going to see a lot of that happening. My view is that the Conservatives will do what they always do. You're spending too much money and we don't know how you're going to pay for it. And my only question would be, what would they have not spent during this pandemic? Because none of them will answer that question every time I ask. Were you not going to support small business or not support companies like Air Canada and all of the thousands of people that needed the support to continue to work? So that's my concern. But they'll go to their old refrain, and that'll be that. The NDP, they'll continue to pull things from the clouds and pretend that they're going to give everybody everything they ever wanted, because they've never had to actually deliver on these promises that they make. So I like to think and hope that the Liberals really are in the sweet spot. They've had the experience now. They've been there for 6 and 7 years. The last couple of years have been very tough in a minority environment. So everybody's pulling them back while they're trying to move forward. Barely got a budget passed that was, again, supporting industry and individuals. So, my hope is that we'll see a lot of detail in a platform with the Liberals that'll talk to the supply chain issues that we've been discussing right here on your show, Tony, to say we understand that. That's why trade infrastructure is critical. And I'm with Gary on shovel ready and shovel necessary. But I will say one thing, when it comes to parks and outdoor spaces, we've got a long way to go. And what the pandemic did teach us is that it's much more important for us to have those outdoor spaces. And I'm glad that they're making those investments now.
Thank you for that. And we're going to hear from Joe Oliver, the final couple of minutes. How does he see the framing of the economic issues in the federal election?
Well, it's pretty obvious, and Sandra said it out, that according to the Liberals, the music will never stop. And the big government is here to stay, and they did bail people out, and they needed to bail people out, but it was the most profligate budget in Canadian history, and we're going to have to pay for it, and our kids and our grandkids are going to. What was missing from the budget, and what's missing from Liberal thinking is growth. That is the absolute critical thing, because without growth, we're going to have a financial crisis, the likes of which will make the early 90s pale in comparison. It's not imminent, but it will happen as interest rates go up, and things become unaffordable, and we have bond rating downgrades. So we've got to start focusing on the private sector, liberating the private sector, making it more competitive, reducing the tax and regulatory burden, allowing businesses to finally start doing what they can do and employ people. That will, that is the solution for many people, because these programs cannot continue indefinitely. And but if people are employed, they don't need to be.
Sure.
But I didn't see anything in the budget which really focused on that critical issue of economic growth.
Our time is up, unfortunately. I know we could talk for another hour. It's a very interesting discussion, but we're going to have to leave it at that. I want to thank our panel once again for being part of this program.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tony.
Very interesting discussion. Even if we don't have an election in the next couple of weeks starting up, those were very important topics to talk about, framing how different political parties are looking at our economic future. We'll be discussing this in the future as well. Thanks for watching.